What do you even know about building schools? Stick to clearing tables." The voice, belonging to Mrs. Eleanor Worthington, was as crisp and cold as the Chablis in her crystal glass. It sliced through the warm, buttery air of the dining room, a space so grand it felt more like a museum hall than a place where people ate. A vast mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, reflected the diamond-like facets of the chandelier above. On its surface, a dozen guests, men in tailored suits and women adorned with pearls and quiet power, paused their conversation, their forks hovering over plates of seared scallops. Sarah did not flinch. Her movements, honed by years of practice, remained fluid and economical. She reached for Eleanor's finished plate, her fingers brushing the fine bone china. For a fleeting second, the entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a reaction. A flicker of anger, a tremor of shame, anything to confirm that the barb had landed. They received nothing. Sarah's face was a mask of professional calm, her eyes focused solely on the task at hand. To clear, to clean, to disappear. She was an expert at disappearing. In a house of loud pronouncements and grand gestures, her currency was silence. Her presence was a whisper. She moved along the edges of rooms, a shadow in a simple gray uniform, her footfalls absorbed by the thick Persian rugs. The Worthingtons and their guests saw her not as a person, but as a function, an extension of the house itself, as inanimate as the grandfather clock chiming softly in the hall. Eleanor Worthington, matriarch of a financial empire built on shrewd acquisitions and aggressive expansion, was holding court. The topic, as it often was during these curated dinners, was the family's philanthropy. Specifically, the new Worthington Global Education Initiative, a project designed to build state-of-the-art schools in what she vaguely termed the developing world. "The logistics are a nightmare, of course," Eleanor continued, waving a dismissive hand, the cluster of diamonds on her ring catching the light. "You can't simply pour concrete. You have to understand the local customs, the supply chains, the people." She said the word people, as if it were a particularly complicated ingredient in a recipe she had no intention of cooking herself. A man to her right, a banking executive with a face as soft and pink as a peony, nodded sagely. "It's noble work, Eleanor, truly noble. We need more families like yours willing to uplift them." Sarah collected the banker's plate, her presence so unobtrusive he didn't even pause in his flattery. They spoke about children in faraway lands as abstract concepts, as numbers on a prospectus for their own salvation. They discussed poverty as a branding opportunity. It was then, as Sarah stood beside the head of the table, that Eleanor had uttered the line. The dismissal was not for the guests. It was a casual assertion of hierarchy, a reminder of place, a reminder to the fixture that it should not presume to have thoughts. Would you endure this? To be spoken about as if you weren't there, your entire existence reduced to the function you perform. As Sarah turned, the weight of the porcelain stacked carefully in her hands, she felt a familiar pressure in the side pocket of her uniform. Her fingers, hidden by the stack of plates, brushed against the worn, folded edge of the photograph she carried everywhere. It was a small, rectangular weight against her hip, a silent counterpoint to the hollow words filling the room. It was her own private truth, a story of foundations laid not with money, but with mud and sweat and a community's shared will. The photograph was a constant, a quiet hum beneath the noise of this life. It was a picture of a different world, one where she was not invisible. In that world she had a name, a voice, a history written in the earth. Here in this gilded cage she was just the help, a ghost who polished the silver and cleared away the remnants of feasts she would never taste. She pushed through the swinging door into the cavernous, stainless steel silence of the kitchen. The clamor of the dining room faded, replaced by the gentle hum of the industrial refrigerator. She placed the plates down on the counter, her movements still precise, still controlled. She did not allow her hands to shake. She did not allow the hot sting behind her eyes to form into tears. Instead, she stood for a moment, her back to the door, and let her shoulders fall just a fraction of an inch. Her right hand went to her pocket, her thumb and forefinger tracing the creased edges of the photo through the thin fabric of her uniform. The image was burned into her mind, a simple one-room schoolhouse under a vast, sun-bleached sky. A group of children, shoeless and smiling, waving from the doorway. And in the corner, a younger version of herself, her face streaked with dirt, her hands holding not a silver platter but a shovel. Eleanor Worthington wanted to build schools. She spoke of it as if it were an act of discovery, a concept she was inventing. Sarah had already built one. The irony was a stone in her throat. She pushed the feeling down, locking it away with all the other things she had to forget to survive the day. Her job was not to remember. Her job was to clear the tables. And so, with a deep, steadying breath, she turned back to the counter and began to rinse the plates, preparing for the dessert course, ready to disappear all over again. Days later, the grand gardens of the Worthington estate were transformed into a film set. A crew of photographers, lighting technicians, and stylists swarmed the manicured lawns. Their black clad forms a stark contrast to the vibrant, meticulously arranged flower beds. They were there to capture the authentic charity work of the Worthington family. Sarah watched from a second-story window as she polished the antique silver. Below, Eleanor Worthington, dressed in designer khaki trousers and a pristine white linen shirt, knelt in a patch of perfectly tilled soil. A stylist rushed in to dab the sweat from her brow before it could smudge her makeup. A photographer directed her to hold a small, clean trowel and smile benevolently at a potted sapling that had been placed in the ground moments earlier. Mr. Worthington stood nearby, sleeves rolled up just so, leaning on a shovel that was so new its varnish gleamed in the sun. It was a performance of compassion, a carefully constructed fiction for the glossy pages of a magazine. Sarah had seen the call sheet. The Worthingtons, sowing the seeds of global change. They were not sowing seeds, they were curating an image. The entire scene was a polished lie, and Sarah was one of the few who saw the mechanics behind the magic trick. Later that afternoon, a guest speaker for the foundation, a man named Mr. Davies who specialized in philanthropic optics, arrived for a strategy meeting. They gathered in the library, a room paneled in dark wood and smelling of old leather and money. Sarah was tasked with serving coffee. As she entered the room with a silver tray, Mr. Davies was mid-sentence, gesturing at a large whiteboard covered in flowcharts and marketing jargon. And so the narrative must be one of empowerment, not charity. We give them a hand up, not a handout, he declared. Sarah moved silently around the room, placing fine china cups on coasters. Her presence was so ingrained in the background scenery that they spoke as if she were deaf and dumb. She lingered for a moment longer than necessary near the door, drawn in by the clinical way they dissected human need and repackaged it as a brand asset. Mr. Davies noticed her pause. His eyes, small and sharp, flickered towards her. He did not see a person, he saw a procedural error, a piece of furniture that was out of place. He leaned towards Eleanor and murmured, his voice a low hiss of disapproval. She should be cleaning, not listening to strategy. Eleanor nodded, a slight, tight gesture. She caught Sarah's eye and gave a nearly imperceptible tilt of her head towards the door. The message was clear. You do not belong here. Leave. Sarah retreated, her back straight, the tray held steady. The quiet click of the library door closing behind her felt like a final punctuation mark on her invisibility. How many times must you be told you are nothing before you start to believe it? Would you tolerate this constant, casual erasure? That night, in the quiet solitude of her small, neat room in the staff quarters, Sarah allowed herself to feel the weight of the day. It was a sterile, impersonal space, but she had made it her own with small touches of warmth. On her nightstand, next to a simple lamp, was a small, hand-carved wooden bird from her village. She sat on the edge of her bed and pulled her wallet from her uniform pocket. From a worn leather flap, she carefully extracted the photograph. The paper was soft and pliant from years of being handled, the corners rounded, the colors faded to a gentle sepia. She held it with a reverence the Worthingtons reserved for stock certificates. The image was everything their staged photo shoot was not. It was raw, real, and devoid of artifice. The school was a humble structure of sun-dried mud bricks and a corrugated tin roof, but it stood proud against the vast, open sky. The children in the doorway were not models. Their smiles were wide and genuine, their eyes bright with a fierce, untamed intelligence. There were no designer clothes, no pristine tools. There was only the honest evidence of collective effort. She looked at the younger version of herself, captured in a moment of unguarded joy, and remembered the feeling of the sun on her back and the blisters on her hands. She remembered the songs they sang as they worked, the shared meals, the unshakable belief that they were building not just a school but a future. This photograph was not a prop. It was a testament. It was the story of who she was before she had learned to make herself small, before her name had been replaced by a job title. She gently traced the outline of the school's roof with her fingertip, the physical connection a silent affirmation. They could erase her from their rooms, but they could not erase the truth she carried in her pocket. The world of the Worthingtons was built on a foundation of perceived infallibility. Their name was synonymous with wealth, power, and thanks to a multi-million-dollar public relations machine, integrity. That foundation cracked, then shattered on a Tuesday morning. The news broke not as a whisper, but as a thunderclap. An investigative journalist from a major online publication, a woman known for her relentless pursuit of corporate malfeasance, published a meticulously researched 10,000-word exposé titled, "The Hollow Kingdom, Inside the Worthington Foundation's Web of Deceit." The article was a bombshell. It detailed, with leaked documents and on-the-record sources, how the Worthington Global Education Initiative was little more than a sophisticated shell game. The funds, earmarked for building schools in 3 different countries, had been funneled through a series of offshore accounts and ultimately invested in high-risk real estate ventures that benefited a company secretly owned by Eleanor Worthington's brother. The much-publicized international school project, the one featured in their glossy magazine spreads, was a complete sham. Not a single brick had been laid. Not a single child had been taught. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The family's name, once a shield, became a target. The stock price of their flagship company, Worthington Corp., plummeted. The phones at the estate began to ring incessantly, a shrill chorus of outrage from board members, investors, and the media. Sarah was in the main hall, dusting a marble bust of Eleanor's great-grandfather when the first tremors of the earthquake hit. She saw Mr. Worthington storm into his study, his face a mask of purple fury, shouting into his phone. She saw Eleanor for the first time, look truly rattled, her composure cracking like fine porcelain. The air in the mansion, usually so still and controlled, was now thick with panic. The staff moved through the chaos with a mixture of fear and a grim, unspoken satisfaction. They had long suspected that the family's charity was more about performance than purpose. Now, the world knew it too. Whispers rustled in the kitchen and the laundry room as they shared links to the article on their phones. For Sarah, the news was not a surprise. She had seen the disconnect between their words and their actions for years. She had watched them spend more on catering for a single fundraising gala than the annual budget of the school in her photograph. But seeing the truth laid bare in stark, undeniable print was something else entirely. It felt like a validation of a reality only she and the other staff had been privy to. The crisis locked the family into a defensive crouch. They were no longer untouchable gods in their marble pantheon. They were cornered, exposed, and bleeding public trust. A countdown had begun. The board demanded an emergency meeting. The press was camped outside their gates. A public statement was required. A sacrifice had to be made. A narrative had to be spun to cauterize the wound before the entire empire bled out. In the midst of the escalating frenzy, Sarah continued her duties. She polished, she cleaned, she served. Her methodical calm was a stark contrast to the hysteria gripping the family. But inside, something had shifted. The scandal wasn't just about money or lies. It was a desecration of the very idea she held sacred. They had used the concept of building schools, the pure and noble work she had poured her own soul into, as a cover for their greed. The injustice of it was a cold, hard knot in her chest. She was now inextricably linked to their crisis, not by choice, but by principle. Her quiet, private truth, the one captured in a faded photograph, was now the diametric opposite of their very public lie. And in the volatile space between those two poles, a reckoning was brewing. The world was demanding an explanation from the Worthingtons, and soon they would be demanding one from everyone in their orbit, including the woman who moved silently through their house, seeing everything. In the eye of the hurricane, the normal rhythms of the household were obliterated for everyone except the children. Lily, the Worthingtons' youngest daughter at 10 years old, was mostly shielded from the unfolding disaster. She existed in a bubble of tutors, piano lessons, and quiet, lonely afternoons. Her latest obsession was a school project on global community initiatives. Her bedroom floor was covered with expensive poster boards, open textbooks, and printouts from the internet. The project was meant to be a diorama and a report on how a community could build something essential, like a well or a clinic, from the ground up. Lily was struggling. The book spoke in abstract terms of stakeholder engagement and resource allocation. Her private tutor, a young, earnest graduate student named Mr. Finch, was trying his best to explain, but his knowledge was purely academic. Sarah entered the room to collect Lily's lunch tray. The girl was staring at a diagram of a water pump, her brow furrowed in frustration. "I don't get it," she announced to no one in particular. "It says here you need a geological survey and a certified engineer, but what if you don't have those? What if you're just people?" Mr. Finch cleared his throat. "Well, Lily, in a modern context, these projects are highly regulated for safety and sustainability. You can't just start digging." Sarah paused at the doorway, a stack of plates in her hands. She knew the answer to Lily's question not from a textbook, but from memory. "Sometimes," Sarah said, her voice soft but clear, "you don't start with a survey, you start by following the goats." Lily and Mr. Finch turned to look at her. It was rare for Sarah to speak unless spoken to, especially about something other than her duties. "The goats?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Sarah stepped into the room, placing the tray on a small table. "In my village," she began, the words feeling strange and powerful on her tongue, "the old women taught us that the goats always know where to find water, even in the dry season. You watch where they graze at dawn. Then you dig. For the foundation of a building, you don't use concrete if you don't have it. You learn to make bricks from the earth itself. You mix clay and straw and water, and you let the sun be your kiln." She spoke with a simple, quiet authority. She described how you could source timber from a fallen tree after a storm, how different types of woven grass could create a roof that was both waterproof and cool, how the entire community, from the children carrying water to the elders offering guidance, became the construction company. She wasn't reciting facts, she was telling a story. She was describing the logistics of hope. Mr. Finch was speechless. He stared at Sarah, his mouth slightly agape. In 5 minutes, this quiet, unassuming maid had provided more practical, tangible information than he had found in a week of research. He was seeing, for the first time, not a uniform, but a mind. He was seeing the ghost of an architect, a project manager, a community leader. How do you know all that?" he stammered. Sarah's expression remained placid, but a flicker of something pride, memory, sorrow passed through her eyes. "Some things you learn from books," she said, picking up the tray. "And some things you learn by doing." She left the room as quietly as she had entered. Lily, however, was galvanized. She grabbed a fresh piece of paper and began sketching furiously, no longer drawing a factory-made pump but a simple well lined with stones, surrounded by people. Mr. Finch remained standing, looking at the empty doorway. He had been in the Worthington house for 6 months and had barely registered Sarah's existence. He had assumed, like everyone else, that her interior world was as simple and Spartan as her uniform. He now understood how profoundly wrong he had been. He had just been given a glimpse of the vast, unacknowledged skill that moved silently through the halls of this house, and the revelation left him both humbled and deeply unsettled. The pressure of the scandal was making the Worthington family volatile. Tristan, the 17-year-old son and heir, was particularly incensed. Stripped of his social standing at his elite private school and mocked online, he stalked the halls of the mansion like a caged predator, radiating a toxic mix of privilege and fury. He was looking for a target, someone on whom he could unleash his frustration, someone who couldn't fight back. He found one in the laundry room. Sarah was sorting linens, the rhythmic task a small island of order in the household's chaos. She had left her small wallet on a folding table nearby, something she rarely did, but she'd been called away unexpectedly from her room mid-task. Tristan stormed in, searching for his favorite cashmere sweater. "Have you seen my sweater, the gray one?" he demanded, not asking so much as accusing. "I believe it is at the dry cleaners, Master Tristan," Sarah replied calmly, not looking up from her work. "Useless," he muttered, kicking at a laundry basket. His eyes scanned the room and landed on Sarah's modest, worn leather wallet. It was open, a corner of the folded photograph peeking out. Curiosity mingled with contempt. He snatched it up. "What's this? You got a secret stash of cash in here, Sarah." Before she could react, he had pulled the photograph out. He held the soft, creased paper between his thumb and forefinger as if it were contaminated. He stared at the image of the mud brick school and the smiling children, his lip curled into a sneer. "What is this? A postcard from your Maid village?" He mocked, his voice dripping with the casual cruelty of a boy who had never been denied anything. "Please," Sarah said, her voice low and steady though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "Give that back to me." Her request only emboldened him. He held it just out of her reach. "Why, is this where you're from? Did you all live in one big mud hut together?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. The photograph was not just paper to Sarah, it was an artifact of her soul. It was her history, her pride, her proof of a life lived with purpose. To see it in his hands, to have it defiled by his scorn, was an agony far sharper than any verbal insult. He saw the pain in her eyes, and it fueled him. With a final, dismissive flick of his wrist, he let the photo fall to the cold tile floor. And then, deliberately, he stepped on it. He ground the heel of his expensive leather shoe onto the image, twisting it back and forth. The sound of the paper grinding against the grit on the floor was a violation. He lifted his foot, leaving a dirty smudge and a deep, angry crease right across the center of the picture, splitting the smiling faces of the children. He gave a final, contemptuous smirk and stalked out of the room, leaving Sarah frozen in place. If that happened to you, what would you do? Would you scream? Would you lash out? Would you crumble in on yourself? Sarah did none of those things. She waited until the sound of his footsteps faded. Then she slowly knelt down, her knees protesting on the hard floor. With a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, she picked up the desecrated photograph. She looked at the new crease, a jagged scar running through the heart of her most precious memory. It was a physical manifestation of their disdain, a brutal summary of how they saw her and the world she came from as something worthless, something to be stepped on and forgotten. She held the photo in her palm, the warmth of her skin pressing against the cool, damaged paper. She did not cry. Instead, a cold, quiet resolve settled deep within her. The insult was no longer abstract. The wound was no longer just to her pride. They had now, quite literally, tried to grind her history into the dirt. And in that moment, kneeling on the laundry room floor, she knew she could not and would not let them bury it. She gently folded the photo along its original creases and slipped it back into the safety of her pocket. The scar it now carried was a part of its story, and a part of hers. In the wood-paneled library, the atmosphere was thick with desperation. The Worthingtons and their crisis management team were gathered for what Mr. Worthington had grimly dubbed a war council. The team was led by Marcus Thorne, a man with a reputation for being a ruthless but effective PR strategist. He had a face like a clenched fist and eyes that saw people not as human beings, but as assets or liabilities. "The narrative is out of control," Marcus said, pacing in front of the unlit fireplace. "Greed, fraud, exploitation. These are the words attached to your name now. We can't just deny, we have to redirect. We need a new story, and we need it yesterday." Eleanor Worthington, her face pale and drawn, tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the mahogany table. "What kind of story? The truth is inconvenient." "The truth is irrelevant," Marcus shot back. "Perception is truth. The public needs a villain. Right now, that's you. We need to give them a different one, someone plausible, someone who can absorb the narrative and deflect the blame." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. "We need a scapegoat." A junior analyst from the PR firm spoke up hesitantly. "But who? The leak came from a high-level source. The documents were confidential." "Exactly," Marcus said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Which is why no one will believe it came from a high-level source. It's too obvious. The public loves a story of betrayal from below, the humble servant with a hidden grudge, the little person who brings down the giants." He turned to the Worthingtons. "Think. Who has access to the whole house? Who sees and hears everything but is treated as if they are invisible? Who has a motive, however flimsy we need to make it?" A heavy silence filled the room. Then Tristan, who had been sulking in a corner, spoke up. His voice was laced with the same venom he had shown in the laundry room. "The maid," he said. "Sarah," Marcus's eyes lit up. "The maid, perfect, tell me about her." She's quiet, too quiet, Alina said, seizing on the idea. The relief in her expression was palpable. She's always watching. I've never trusted her. She knows things, Tristan added eagerly. The other day she was going on and on to Lily's tutor about building things in her village. It was weird, like she was trying to prove she was smart. Marcus's smile widened. The pieces were clicking into place. Excellent. We can build on that. Disgruntled. Overly ambitious. Believes she's smarter than her station. We can paint a picture of a woman who felt overlooked and decided to get her revenge by leaking falsified documents to the press. We can suggest she was paid by a corporate rival. Will people believe it? Mr. Worthington asked, his voice heavy with doubt. They will if we make them, Marcus said with chilling confidence. We control the channels. We leak her name to a friendly columnist. We release a statement expressing our deep disappointment in a trusted member of our household staff. We focus on the betrayal, the violation of our home. We make you the victims. The trap was being designed, right there in the library. It was a cold, calculated strategy to sacrifice a human being to save a brand name. They were twisting Sarah's quiet competence, her dignity and her private history into a weapon to be used against her. They would take her defining characteristics, her watchfulness, her intelligence, her resilience, and reframe them as evidence of her guilt. Sarah, at that very moment, was in the kitchen, meticulously polishing the silver tea service she would soon be asked to bring to the library. She had no idea that in the room next door her life was being rewritten, her character assassinated, and her future offered up as a sacrifice to the very people she served. The system was closing in, and she was the target. The confrontation came the next morning. Sarah was summoned not to the library or the study, but to the formal drawing room, a cold and imposing space used only for the most important guests. It was a deliberate choice, designed to intimidate. Alina Worthington stood by the grand marble fireplace, her posture rigid, her face a mask of practiced sorrow. Marcus Thorne stood beside her, a silent, imposing presence. Mr. Worthington was conspicuously absent, a cowardly retreat from the dirty work. Sarah, Alina began, her voice infused with a false tone of regret, we have something very difficult to discuss with you. Sarah stood before them, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She met Alina's gaze without fear, her own expression calm and unreadable. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, what was coming. The air was thick with the stench of a prepared lie. An internal investigation into the security breach has revealed some disturbing information, Alina continued, gesturing to a thin folder Marcus was holding. It has come to our attention that you had access, and it appears, a motive for leaking confidential family documents to the press. The accusation hung in the air, absurd and monstrous. Sarah's mind raced, connecting the dots, the scandal, Tristan's aggression, the war council in the library. This was the outcome. This was their solution. That is not true, Mrs. Worthington, Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. We have reason to believe you were resentful of your position here, Marcus interjected, stepping forward. His tone was slick and oily. That you felt you were owed more. We have a witness who heard you boasting about your expertise to another staff member. He was twisting the incident with Lily's tutor into a confession. The injustice of it was breathtaking. They were using her own quiet dignity against her. Every moment of competence, every instance of her refusing to be diminished, was now being presented as a motive for a crime she did not commit. I have done my work here with honor, Sarah stated, her voice unwavering. Alina let out a small, theatrical sigh. We wanted to believe that. We treated you like family, and you have repaid our kindness with this ultimate betrayal. She opened the folder. We are prepared to be lenient. If you sign a confession and a non-disclosure agreement, we will not press criminal charges. We will simply let you go. It was a trap laid bare. Sign and admit to a lie that would follow her for the rest of her life. Refuse and face the full, terrifying power of the Worthington legal machine. What would you sacrifice to stay true to yourself, your reputation, your freedom? Sarah looked from Alina's cold, unforgiving eyes to Marcus's smug expression. She saw the entirety of their plan. They didn't want justice. They wanted a story that would save them. They needed her to play the villain so they could remain the victims. In that moment, she thought of the school. She thought of the calloused hands of the women who had made the bricks alongside her, of the hopeful faces of the children. She thought of the desecrated photograph in her pocket. Her integrity was the only thing she truly owned, the one thing they had not yet been able to take from her. She would not give it away now. "I will not sign a lie," she said. Marcus's eyes narrowed. The pretense of civility vanished. "Then you leave us no choice. You are suspended, effective immediately, pending a formal investigation. Security will escort you from the premises. You are not to speak to any other members of staff." A door had closed. The system, with all its immense power, was pushing back, casting her out. She was isolated, accused, and facing an enemy with limitless resources. As two stone-faced security guards appeared at the doorway, Sarah felt a wave of despair wash over her. It was a near-breaking moment, a glimpse into an abyss of powerlessness. But as they led her down the long, silent hallway, past the portraits of Worthington ancestors who stared down with cold, indifferent eyes, the despair began to recede. It was replaced by something harder, something forged in the sun and mud of her past. It was a quiet vow. They had pushed her out of their house, but they had underestimated her. They thought they were silencing her, but they were only setting her free. She touched the photo in her pocket one last time. They had started this. She would finish it. The days following her suspension were a blur of suffocating silence. Sarah was confined to her small room, the walls feeling as if they were closing in. Her few friends on the staff had been warned away, their hurried, fearful text messages tapering off into nothing. She was an island, cut off from the world she had inhabited for years. The Worthingtons, meanwhile, were executing their strategy with brutal efficiency. A syndicated columnist, known for his friendly relationship with the family, published a piece hinting at a shocking betrayal from within the Worthington household, casting suspicion on a disgruntled employee. Sarah knew she had a choice. She could disappear as they intended. She could retreat into the shadows, find another anonymous job and carry the stain of their lie forever. Or she could fight. But how could one woman with no resources and no voice fight an empire? The answer, she realized, lay not in shouting louder, but in speaking a clearer truth. They had built their defense on a foundation of lies. Her only weapon was the one thing they didn't have, an undeniable, verifiable fact. Her plan began to form, not as a grand strategy, but as a series of small, careful steps. She knew the Worthingtons, in their arrogance, would make a mistake. They would overplay their hand. Their desperation for public absolution would lead them to stage a performance, and that performance would be her stage. Her first step was to reach out to the one person who had seen a glimpse of who she really was, Mr. Finch, Lily's tutor. She found his number on an old tutoring schedule. She called him, her heart pounding. She didn't know if he would answer or if he would be too afraid. He answered on the second ring. She spoke simply, without accusation or drama. She told him what had happened and made a simple request, if he was ever asked, to simply tell the truth about their conversation in Lily's room. To his credit, the young man, though audibly nervous, agreed. It was a small crack of light in the darkness. The Worthingtons' mistake came, as she predicted, in the form of a prime-time television interview. It was Marcus Thorne's masterstroke, a live, televised conversation with a respected journalist, designed to portray the family as victims who were nonetheless handling the crisis with grace and fortitude. Then came the move that was so audacious, so dripping with condescending arrogance, that Sarah almost couldn't believe it. An assistant from the television studio called her. The Worthingtons, the woman explained, were extending an olive branch. As a gesture of their fundamental belief in forgiveness and reconciliation, they were inviting her to the taping of the interview. She wouldn't be asked to speak, of course. She would simply be there in the audience, a silent testament to their magnanimity. "They want the camera to see you," the assistant said, "to show the world that even in the face of your betrayal they have grace." It was the trap, and it was the opportunity. They didn't see it as a risk. To them, she was a prop, a piece of scenery in their grand drama of redemption. They were so blinded by their own narrative that they couldn't imagine she would have one of her own. "I will be there," Sarah said, her voice betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through her veins. On the evening of the interview, she prepared not for a battle but for a testimony. She did not dress in armor. She chose a simple, dark blue dress, dignified and unadorned. It was the kind of dress that deflects attention, that makes the wearer seem part of the background. It was a uniform of a different kind. In her small handbag she placed her wallet, and inside the wallet she placed the creased, dirt-smudged photograph. It was her only piece of evidence, her only script. As she entered the bright, cold television studio, a production assistant led her to a seat in the back of the audience. She could see the Worthingtons on the brightly lit stage, looking somber and elegant. Alina gave her a tight, triumphant little smile. She saw Sarah not as a threat, but as a checkmate. Sarah sat down, her hands folded in her lap. The studio lights were hot, the cameras like predatory black eyes. She was entering the proving ground, the arena where their fiction would collide with her fact. She felt a profound and steadying calm settle over her. She was not there to create a storm. She was there to be the quiet, immovable rock upon which their storm would break. The interview began as a masterclass in spin. The journalist, a woman with a reputation for being tough but fair, tossed gentle, open-ended questions. The Worthingtons, coached to perfection by Marcus, responded with practiced humility. They spoke of their profound regret over the managerial oversights within the foundation. They talked about their unwavering commitment to making things right. Then, the journalist turned to the topic of the leak. "There have been reports," she said, her tone sympathetic, "that this crisis was exacerbated by an act of internal betrayal." Alina dabbed a tearless eye with a silk handkerchief. "That has been the most painful part of this ordeal," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "To have our trust violated by someone we welcomed into our home, it's a pain I wouldn't wish on anyone." The camera panned to Sarah for a brief, calculated moment. She sat perfectly still, her face betraying nothing. The audience murmured, a wave of sympathy washing towards the stage. The journalist, following the script, then turned her attention to Sarah. "Ma'am," she said, her voice projecting across the silent studio, "the family has shown incredible grace by inviting you here tonight. Is there anything you'd like to say about your loyalty to the family that took you in?" This was the moment, the kill shot. They expected her to stammer, to cry, to look guilty under the glare of a million eyes. Sarah did not answer the question. Instead, she rose slowly to her feet. All eyes, all cameras swiveled to face her. In the control room, Marcus Thorne leaned forward, a frown creasing his face. This was not part of the plan. "My loyalty," Sarah said, her voice not loud but carrying a profound weight that commanded the room's attention, "has never been for sale." She took a few steps forward, into the aisle, into the light. "You speak tonight about building schools. You speak about building hope." She reached into her handbag and pulled out the photograph. She held it up, her hand steady. It was small and worn, but in the focused glare of the studio lights, it seemed to radiate a power of its own. "This," she said, her voice clear and resonant, "is what real hope looks for. This isn't a press kit. This isn't a staged photo op." She walked to the edge of the stage, her gaze locked on Alina Worthington, whose face had gone rigid with shock. "This is a school in my village, a village called Pono," she said, giving it a name, a place on the map. "I helped build it 15 years ago, with my hands. With my community, we did not have a foundation. We did not have a PR team. We had a belief that our children deserved to learn." She held the photograph out for the nearest camera to capture. The director in the control booth, sensing a story far more compelling than the one he'd been hired to film, zoomed in. The image filled the screens in the studio and in homes across the country, a humble mud brick building, smiling children, and a deep, angry crease running through its center. "This photograph," Sarah said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone closer, "was in my wallet when your son, Tristan, found it. He called it a postcard from a Maid village, then he threw it on the floor and ground it under his heel." A collective gasp went through the audience. On stage, Tristan's face went white. Alina looked as if she had been struck. "You speak of betrayal," Sarah concluded, her eyes sweeping from the family to the journalist and finally to the camera. "You want to know about my loyalty. It is to the truth, and this is the truth." The studio was utterly silent. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely, irrevocably shattered. Sarah had not raised her voice, had not leveled accusations of fraud. She had simply presented a single, unimpeachable fact, an artifact of a truth so profound and authentic that it made everything the Worthingtons had said seem like a cheap and flimsy lie. Did you feel that shift? It was the sound of a carefully constructed world turning to dust. The stunned silence was broken only by the frantic clicking of cameras. Sarah had walked in as a prop and would walk out as a legend. The reversal was complete. The fallout from the interview was a media firestorm. The clip of Sarah holding up the photograph went viral, played on a loop on every news channel, and shared millions of times across social media. The hashtag "This is what hope looks for" trended for days. The Worthington narrative had been obliterated, replaced by Sarah's quiet, powerful truth. The family retreated into a panicked silence, their PR strategy in ruins. Marcus Thorne was fired. Board members of Worthington Corp demanded an independent investigation. The public, captivated by Sarah's dignity and courage, clamored for her story. Interview requests poured in from every major network and newspaper. For the first time, Sarah was the one with the power, the one everyone wanted to listen to. She could have used this platform for revenge. She could have detailed every slight, every moment of humiliation. She could have sued the Worthingtons for defamation, a case she would almost certainly win, and walked away a wealthy woman. But Sarah did not want vengeance. Vengeance was their language, the currency of power and domination. She wanted something far more radical. She wanted justice. Real justice. What does real justice look like here? Not punishment, but repair. She agreed to a single, exclusive interview with the same journalist who had conducted the live broadcast, the woman whose fair-mindedness had given her the space to speak. They met not in a cold studio, but in a quiet park, sitting on a simple wooden bench. The journalist asked the question the world was asking. "What do you want, Sarah? What do you want from the Worthingtons?" Sarah thought for a moment before she answered. "I don't want their money," she said calmly. "Their money is the source of the problem. It insulated them from the truth. I don't want an apology, because a forced apology is just another performance. What I want is for the harm to be undone, and for a new system to be put in place so it can never happen again." She then laid out her proposal. It was not a demand. It was a blueprint. It was the careful, practical plan of an architect, not the angry cry of a victim. She proposed that the Worthington Foundation be fundamentally and transparently restructured. That its existing board, composed of the Worthingtons' friends and business associates, be dissolved. She proposed the creation of a new global verification board, responsible for vetting every single project, ensuring its legitimacy, and monitoring its progress. And this was the revolutionary part. She proposed that this board be composed not of financiers and executives, but of people with lived, on-the-ground experience in community development. Teachers, local engineers, village elders, and project managers from the very regions the foundation claimed to serve. "The people who know how to build schools are the ones who have actually built them," she explained. The foundation's failure was a failure of imagination. They never thought to listen to the people they claimed to be helping. That has to change. The journalist was stunned by the clarity and moral force of her vision. Sarah wasn't just asking for a course correction. She was demanding a complete paradigm shift, away from top-down, performative charity and towards authentic, community-led partnership. The proposal was elegant, fair, and impossible for the crumbling Worthington empire to refuse. It was a path to redemption, the only one available. Her choice of soft justice, of systemic change over personal retribution, was a masterstroke. It cemented her moral authority and left the stakeholders, the board, the investors, the public, with a clear and compelling path forward. The choice was no longer about punishing the Worthingtons. It was about embracing a better way. The pressure on the Worthington Corporation's board of directors became immense. Sarah's proposal was not just a suggestion. It became a public mandate. Shareholders, employees, and the media all rallied behind the idea of the new verification board. It was a clear, actionable solution to a problem that had seemed like an intractable moral rot. To reject, it would be to confirm their own corruption. After a week of intense, behind-the-scenes negotiations, the board capitulated. They released a public statement announcing the complete restructuring of the Worthington Foundation. The old board was dissolved. The foundation's assets were temporarily frozen pending a full, independent audit, and they announced the formation of the Global Verification Board, its structure and mandate adopted directly from Sarah's proposal. The new governing policy, which mandated community co-leadership on all international projects and required transparent, on-site progress reports, was officially named the Sarah Accords. The final point of the announcement was the most significant. The board requested that Sarah, the woman they had tried to destroy, accept the position as the first chair of the new board. It was a total vindication. But Sarah knew that a title and a new policy were meaningless without real change. The system would resist. Old habits of power and privilege wouldn't vanish overnight. She accepted the position, but with conditions. Her first act as chair was not to move into a lavish corner office, but to convene the first meeting of the new board. The members were unlike any group that had ever gathered in the Worthington Tower. There was a retired engineer from Peru who had pioneered earthquake-proof building techniques using local materials. There was a women's education advocate from rural India who had started a school in her own home. There was Mr. Finch, Lily's former tutor, who Sarah invited to represent the perspective of education within the developed world. It was a board built on experience, not on status. Their first task was to review the foundation's existing commitments. They immediately defunded 3 vanity projects and reallocated the millions of dollars towards dozens of smaller, community-vetted initiatives digging wells, funding teacher salaries, providing scholarships. The change began to ripple outwards. The Sarah Accords started to be discussed in philanthropic circles as a new model for ethical engagement. Other foundations began to re-examine their own practices. Would this change be enough in your workplace? The question hung in the air, a challenge to a system long overdue for a reckoning. Sarah's new office was modest, located not on the top executive floor, but on a lower level, closer to the mailroom than the boardroom. She insisted on it. From her window, she couldn't see the entire city skyline, but she could see the people on the street below. It was a constant reminder of who she was working for. The path forward would be long, and resistance to the new way of doing things was a quiet but constant current. But for the first time in a long time, the path was open, and it was pointed in the direction of genuine hope. Weeks turned into months. Sarah's life was now a whirlwind of board meetings, project proposals, and site visits. She wore tailored suits instead of a uniform, and people listened intently when she spoke. The external markers of her life had transformed, but the true measure of her healing came not in a boardroom, but during a quiet moment in her simple apartment. She had scheduled a video call with her home village, Capono. It was late evening for her, early morning for them. The face that appeared on her laptop screen was that of Mrs. Adama, the current head teacher of the school Sarah had helped build, a woman whose wisdom was etched in the lines around her eyes. Behind Mrs. Adama, crowded into the small school office, were dozens of faces, elders, parents, and children, all waving and smiling. "Sarah," Mrs. Adama's voice crackled through the speaker, warm and joyful. "We have seen you on the news. The whole world has seen you. We are so proud, our daughter." Sarah felt a wave of emotion so powerful it took her breath away. These were the people who had known her long before the world had given her a label. They had never seen her as the help. They had only ever seen her as Sarah, the girl who was good with numbers, the young woman who wasn't afraid of hard work, the leader who had helped them build a dream out of mud and hope. "The children have made something for you," Mrs. Adama said, her eyes twinkling. She stepped aside, and a group of young students, the next generation to learn in that humble building, came forward. They were holding up a large hand-painted sign made from a piece of cardboard. On it, in bright, joyful letters, were the words, "Thank you, Sarah. You are our hope." Then one of the older students held up a new photograph. It was a picture of the entire school, all the students and teachers, standing in front of the building, waving at the camera. It was a recreation of her old photo, a new generation inhabiting the legacy she had helped create. Tears, hot and unstoppable, streamed down Sarah's face. They were not tears of sorrow or anger, but of profound release. It was a quiet, personal healing that had nothing to do with the Worthingtons or the foundation. Her dignity, which she had so fiercely protected in private, was now being reflected back to her by the community that had forged it. Their validation was the only one that had ever truly mattered, whose voice helped you heal when no one clapped. For Sarah, it was this chorus of voices, traveling across thousands of miles, reminding her of who she was. She looked at their smiling faces, at the enduring strength of the school standing behind them, and she finally felt the last of the cold weight of the Worthington mansion lift from her shoulders. She had been defined for so long by their perception of her. Now, Sitting in her quiet apartment, bathed in the glow of her laptop screen, she reclaimed her own definition. She was not a maid, not a victim, not even a bored chair. She was a daughter of Capono, and she was home. True respect, Sarah learned, did not arrive with applause or public declarations. It arrived quietly, in moments of unadorned professional exchange. Several months into her tenure as chair, she received a formal request for a meeting from Mr. Worthington SR. She was wary. She had not spoken to any of the family members directly since the interview. She agreed to the meeting, but on her own terms in her office, not his. He arrived precisely on time, looking older and diminished. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary sort of gravity. He was not accompanied by lawyers or assistants. He was alone. He did not begin with a flowery, insincere apology. There were no platitudes about how much he regretted what had happened. Sarah was grateful for the omission. She had heard enough empty words to last a lifetime. Instead, he placed a thin portfolio on her desk. "Miss Mensah," he said, using her last name for the first time. "The board has asked me to step away from all foundation activities. Before I do, I am tasked with presenting the 3 finalists for the foundation's new domestic literacy program. My opinion is no longer relevant. Yours is." He opened the portfolio. Inside were 3 detailed proposals for funding inner-city reading programs. "I would be grateful," he continued, his voice even and formal, "for your professional assessment." It was a simple, profound moment of recognition. He was not approaching her as a maid to be absolved or as a symbol of his company's redemption. He was approaching her as the expert, the authority. He was acknowledging her competence, not just her story. It was a transfer of power made real not by a press release, but by this quiet, humble act of deference. She spent the next hour with him, going through the proposals line by line. She questioned budget allocations, pointed out potential logistical hurdles, and praised innovative outreach strategies. She was sharp, insightful, and fair. She was the architect, the strategist, the leader she had always been. He listened intently, taking notes. He did not challenge or interrupt. He simply absorbed her expertise. When they were finished, he stood up. "Thank you, Miss Mensah," he said. "You have given the board exactly the clarity it needed." He paused at the door. "The foundation is in better hands now." He left. Sarah sat at her desk for a long time after he was gone. That quiet, hour-long meeting meant more to her than any headline. It was recognition done right. It wasn't about making him feel better. It was about acknowledging her value. The meeting also signified something larger. By treating her with this newfound respect, Mr. Worthington was, in his own way, opening a door. He was signaling to the old guard, to the entire entrenched system he represented, that the rules had changed. Competence, not connection, was the new currency. A door was opening, not just for her, but for all the others like her, the ones with hidden talents and overlooked wisdom who were just waiting for someone to finally ask for their professional assessment. The main lobby of the Worthington Tower had been redesigned. The cold, corporate marble and imposing sculptures had been replaced with warmer wood tones and walls displaying photographs from the foundation's new, authentic projects. It was a space that now told a story of partnership, not of power. The centerpiece of the new design was unveiled at a small, private ceremony for the foundation's staff and community partners. There was no media, no fanfare. It was a moment of quiet reflection. On the main wall, where a massive, abstract oil painting once hung, there was now a single, beautifully framed photograph. It was Sarah's photograph. It had been professionally restored with painstaking care. The grime and smudges were gone. The colors were gently brought back to life. But the restoration was not a sanitization. The restorers, at Sarah's specific request, had left one imperfection intact. Faintly visible, running like a delicate fault line across the image, was the crease from Tristan's shoe. It was a scar, a memory of the photo's journey, a testament to the truth it had survived. Sarah stood before it, looking at the image that had lived for so long in the private darkness of her pocket, now displayed for the whole world to see. Its meaning had been utterly transformed. Did the object's meaning change for you too? What was once a hidden symbol of her private pride, then a desecrated emblem of their disrespect, was now a public icon of integrity. It was the foundation's new cornerstone. Lily, now 11, stood beside Sarah, holding her hand. She looked up at the picture of the smiling children in Cape Ono. "You miss them, don't you?" Lily asked softly. Sarah squeezed her hand. "I carry them with me," she replied, her eyes on the photo, "just like I used to carry this." She thought of the journey, from her pocket to the laundry room floor, from the TV studio to this place of honor. It was a history of her own resilience. The photograph was no longer just a window into her past. It was a compass pointing towards the Foundation's future. It was a permanent reminder, etched onto the wall of their shared space, that the most profound truths are often carried in the humblest of vessels, and that real strength is not about avoiding scars, but about having the courage to show them. She felt a quiet readiness for the future. The fight was not over, but the most important battle, the one for the truth, had been won. The evidence was right here on the wall, a silent, powerful echo of a story that would never again be erased. 1 year later, the lobby of the Worthington Foundation is bustling with a quiet, focused energy. The air is different now. The hushed, reverent tones are gone, replaced by a vibrant hum of conversation in multiple languages. A group of new interns, young, bright, and diverse, are on a tour. They are the first class to be recruited under the Foundation's new outreach initiatives, programs designed and championed by Sarah to find talent in places the old guard had never thought to look. The tour guide, a young woman who was a junior analyst during the scandal, stops the group in front of the main wall. She gestures to the framed photograph. "This," she says, her voice full of a quiet pride, "is our most important piece of art. It's more important than any stock ticker or earnings report. This is our mission statement." The interns gaze at the image of the mud brick school, their expressions thoughtful. One of them points to the faint crease. "What's that line?" he asks. The guide smiles a little. "That's the most important part," she replies. "That's a scar. It reminds us that truth can be stepped on, but it can't be broken. It reminds us that integrity is not about being perfect. It's about what you do after you've failed." She pauses, letting them absorb the weight of that statement. "This foundation was almost destroyed by a lie," she continues. "It was saved by the truth of this one photograph and by the woman who carried it. Her name is Sarah Mensah. She's our board chair now, and the policy she wrote, the Sarah Accords, is why most of you are standing here today." The camera pans from the interns' inspired faces to the photograph on the wall. It lingers there, on the image of a humble school and the enduring smiles of its children. The final, tangible sign of continuity is the daily presence of this image, a silent teacher in the heart of the tower. The tour guide's final words hang in the air, an understated line of hope. That's how real change started here, with someone they didn't see and a truth they couldn't ignore.